Hi, welcome back to the Busy Corner. This is lesson 31. I'm going to show you how to make a brioche flat one color scarf like the one I'm wearing. This was made with 2 skeins, 2 strands held together of the Premier Deborah Norville Serenity chunky tweeds. This is in the color claret, and this is a number 5 weight yarn. It's 109 yards, and I made it on the US, the size comparable to the US 17 knitting rods, and that's the 3/8 inch peck tubing. So, and I made it 8 stitches wide. I'll take it off here in a second, you can see. And I made it 168 rows, basically till I was out of yarn. And then I wove the 2 edges together, the 2 short ends, using lesson 6 in my video. I actually had to go look at my video. And it took me 2.5 hours to make it. I hadn't made a scarf forever. I couldn't remember how to do it, how I held the yarn. Isn't that funny? So anyway, this was the yarn I used. Now, this was a request, this brioche stitch, and I didn't see, I apologize to the viewer who asked me about this because I didn't see your message till recently. YouTube has a different way they notify people now, so I didn't see that you had asked about this. And I'm glad you did. This was a fun stitch. But in trying to figure this stitch out, I realized that in my last video, I didn't do my yarn over correctly. I don't think. So I've put it back to private until I can review that. I think I did it backwards because I finally figured this out, but it took some doing. So this is what 8 stitches wide will look like if you do it with the yarn I do. And you will see that brioche stitch is the same on the front and back, almost exactly. And it's basically a double knit. And it is this long if you did it with the yarn that I did, or if you wanted a little bit shorter. I like to twist it once before I put it over the second time. But if you wanted a little wider and you didn't want to add more yarn, you could do 10 stitches and have it be just a little bit shorter. So that's that. Now, the next video after I do this one, we'll be doing a 2-color Mobius on the hoop. And so if you've been looking at brioche stitch online, this is what you're probably familiar with seeing. So on one side, the one color will dominate, but on the other side, the other color dominates. And I'm doing this on the little tubular knitter. So the next time I do a video, we'll be doing the 2-color. But this is far more complicated, and it will probably be a 2-parter. So we're going to move the camera, and I'll show you how to do this. Okay, first I want to show you a new cast on, and I saw this in a knitting book I purchased recently. Instead of making a slip knot, and it's actually kind of a weird, complicated thing she shows that's basically nothing more than a twist. So take your tail and come in for as long as you need to accomplish your cast on. We're just going to put on 8 stitches so I can show you how to do this brioche stitch. But take your tail now off to it'll be on the left, and have it so that you basically have an upside down letter U, and just twist it once so that it looks like almost the number 8, and then twist it again. Now put that on your pipe, and that allows you to make basically the beginning of your cast on without using a knot. I got tired of that with that thick yarn, and I think this looks much better. Now cast on then in your normal fashion, but be sure to keep it loose. Brioche stitch is very stretchy, so you know you can either make it loose this way. Some people double up their needles, or you could even stick a pencil in there or another knitting needle alongside the edge of your knitting rod. But you want to make sure that this is quite loose. I'm not leaving myself much of a tail, but that's alright. This is just for our purposes here. I barely have enough, but that's okay. Okay, now we have 8 stitches on. Whenever you're going to knit brioche, you need to put on an even number of stitches because of how the pattern works out. And let me see if I can turn my chair a little bit this way. Is that showing up there, Joe?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the first thing you need to do in brioche, and you notice I cast onto the right-hand side, the first thing you need to do is make your setup, what's called a setup row. And this is where you're going to add all your yarn overs for this row. So the first thing you need to do is start with a yarn over, and we're going to do it this way. Take your working yarn and go under the opposite pipe and hold it up in the air. Take off the first stitch because the next stitch is a slip stitch. The pattern for the setup row is yarn over, slip one, knit one. So my yarn over begins this way. I slip one. Now take your yarn down between your pipes, take off the next stitch and knit it, or front stitch it. Now yarn over, so we do the same thing. Bring your yarn back under, slip, take the yarn down between, knit the next stitch, or front stitch it, yarn over, slip, take the yarn down between, knit, yarn up, slip, yarn down between the needles, knit one. Make sure that your yarn over stays up there as you're knitting that first and last stitch. Those are the trickiest. You've completed your setup row. Now you begin your pattern, and your pattern is yarn over, slip one, purl two together. If we were doing, that's for the rods, if we were doing it on straight needles, you would just continue to use knit stitches. But since we're doing it on the rods, you need to back stitch your next round. So you're going to first yarn over by taking your yarn up under the opposite pipe. You're going to take your first stitch off and slip it. Now you're going to purl two together. Now you're going to keep this yarn, your working yarn, up. You're going to take off, I'm going to drop that so I can show you what this looks like. So you're going to have one stitch here, that's the one you slipped, and this is the yarn over. And when you hold them up, they're going to look like this, or separately like this. And when I finally figured this out, that's what told me I think I did the yarn over incorrectly in my last video. I don't think there should be a twist in there. Now you're going to back stitch these two together, and you're going to pipe it. Now you're going to yarn over again. So this time you take the yarn, it's up from making the stitch, come back down and under and slip another stitch. Keep holding your yarn up. Take your next two stitches off, which again is the yarn over that's in my right hand and the stitch you slipped in my left, and you're going to back stitch these two together. You're going to bring the yarn back down, yarn over, slip one, and now you're going to take two stitches off and you're going to purl those together. Now this seems simple, right? But you're going to mess it up. And then when we get done with a few rows, I'm going to show you how to fix it when you've made a mistake. Now you have your yarn up. Don't make the mistake of going into automatic pilot and knitting this. You can look, keep your eye on where your yarn, where you've just placed your yarn, and you can see that there needs to be a slip stitch there. Now take your last two stitches off. They're going to look like this. So you don't want to let go of those. That yarn over is easy to lose track of. And now back stitch that. Now you're ready to begin round 3, and you just bring your yarn back to the middle, back to your neutral position. Take your yarn to the opposite pipe and under it and up in the air. You're going to slip your stitch, bring your yarn down between the pipes so that it's in place to knit two together. And seen from the side, your next two stitches are going to be kind of hanging out there together. If I separated these, you would see that this was my yarn over and my slip, this was my purl, or my my purl two together, my yarn over and slip, my purl two together. You see how they kind of will be together. In fact, if you look at it this way, they're actually crossed over. And notice it's on that side of it, but that yarn over with the slip is going to be crossed over. Anyway, let's continue with this row. So now you go back up, and now and down, and this is where I knit the two together. Now up and over, slip, bring the yarn down between the pipes so that it's in place to knit two together. And again, when you see these stitches, one will be the slip, one will be the yarn over, and you're going to knit them together. And yarn up, slip, bring your yarn down between, and knit two together. And bring your yarn up, and slip, and bring your yarn down, and knit two together. Now this last one's a little tricky, especially if you made it a little tight as you wrapped. So my caution would be, and you're just going to repeat then, round 2 and 3, back and forth, back and forth. When you bring your yarn to the opposite side to start it, don't pull too tightly, because that'll make that last stitch a little tight. So once you've yarned over, which again, you just begin by coming up under the pipe, and you slip. Now take a look, if you get a little, again, you just keep checking yourself, because it's easy to make the mistake of either forgetting the yarn over, or yarn over every time, or trying to knit your slips. So now the yarn is back down and up, slip, bring those 2 stitches off, and purl them together. So you're wrapping the yarn around, you're slipping, you're purling 2 together. Now for the video, I put my long uprights on, but when you do this in reality, you might want your shorter uprights, because your arms are going to get a little tired, depending on how high your table is. So every time you're on this side, you're going to be knitting the stitches, because that's what you did in round 1. So just remember that when you yarn over, you're going under the opposite pipe to begin, and you're slipping that stitch, and then those 2 stitches, that this will become basically a stitch, you yarn over, and that slip will be the ones you knit together the next time. Now bring your yarn down. Be careful those don't fall off while you're doing it. And then those are the 2 you knit together. And yarn up and over, slip, yarn down so that you can knit the other 2 stitches. Knit 2 together. Yarn up and slip, bring your yarn down, knit 2 together, yarn up, slip, knit 2 together. And we'll do one more row with the back stitches. So bring your yarn up and beginning to go over, and slip your first stitch, keep your yarn up, take your yarn off. Now you can start to see that you have a row of stockinette stitches there. And again, when you hold them in your fingers, it'll almost be a stitch in an archway, and that's what it should look like. And if you're using double strands, you're going to have 4 strands of yarn here. So I think what you'll find is you won't be able to get this quite as tight. Yarn down between, up. You can get it tighter on knitting needles, I think, than you can on the rods. Now take those stitches off, and again you can see the line of stockinette stitches there. Slip stitches, really, if you will. I'm sitting off to the side, so this is a little awkward here. And yarn up and slip. And take your stitches off. Yarn down, yarn over and up. Slip, keep your yarn up, take the last 2 stitches off. That's what this is going to look like. Should look just like that. Now, when you're ready to cast off, and it'll take a few rows to start looking like something. Even now, you can barely see that this is a row, column of V's, here, 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 and here. And on the other side, does the same thing. It's hard to tell right now, because it's just begun. But you should, even after a few rows, you should already see that beginning. If you don't, something's wrong. And I will say, I wasn't sure I was doing this right. And of course, I did it on knitting needles, which I should have done on the last video, and I didn't. So I did on knitting needles first, and they're not exactly the same. You'll notice that this side, that row of V's is slightly different, and it looks the same way on knitting needles. And I think it's because how you do the yarn over when you bring it back between, for instance, when you're doing the front stitches. But it's pretty close to being exactly the same. If you were to look at this scarf, for example, it's very hard to tell the difference. And it's very stretchy. So it's a lot like fisherman's rib, except that the back really does look like the front. And again, on this one, because of the way this is done, you can get stripes. On one side, you'll see this. See, this is the looser side, just like it is here. And it comes out the same way on knitting needles, although my purl stitch isn't very tight. So on knitting needles, it's actually looser, my light gray. But you can see what happens. And so this is a Mobius, and then we'll do this next time. This is trickier, but anyway, now I'm going to show you how to fix a mistake. And you would continue in this way, alternating round 2 and round 3, and when you get to your bind off, you're going to knit 1, then knit 2 together, because you have to reduce that. Notice. So that's what you'll be doing on your last row. Now, let's say you make a mistake, and you will if you knit like me, because you will have, as I said, you'll either do an extra yarn over or do, knit your slip. Be very careful and just when you realize you've made a mistake, and you'll realize it when you go to knit the next row, and you'll say, uh-oh, how come I have, 2 single stitches in a row? As you see that never happens. Just make sure you take your stitches off, one by one. Let's say you want to undo it. Don't just pull the yarn. Take your finger where the yarn is. Now pull the yarn. Now, leave the yarn there. Now pipe it. And you're going to back up one by one. Take the stitch. Now, here, you say, well, that was my, whoops. Let's put this back. That was my yarn over. All I have to do is undo that. Take this off. Put it back. Okay, here's another one I got to undo, let's say. Take it off. Follow your yarn. Put your finger in there. Pull the yarn. Hold on to those stitches. Move the yarn away. Put the stitches back on. Okay, here was my slip. Just take it one by one. And so don't get frustrated when you realize that, maybe you goobered up a row. Just go stitch by stitch, one by one. Now again, here was one where you knit 2 together. So just put your finger in there, pull your yarn. You're going to need to bring your yarn back around so that you can repipe those. And if that's the point at which you had made the mistake, then you can just continue. If it wasn't and you need to keep going, unwrap your yarn, put your slip stitch back. I think you get my meaning. So don't try to take it off the rods and pull it and then hope to pick that up, because it's hard to pick up that yarn over afterwards. And that's it for today's lesson. Happy knitting.